The train that brought the bride. The train shrieked through the canyon like something alive, its whistle slicing the afternoon heat. Dust rose in spirals around the red mesa platform, settling on boots, skirts, and rifle barrels. The whole town had come to watch. Nobody ever stepped off the 310 from Abilene unless they carried news or trouble. By the time the iron beast hissed to a stop, silence hung thick. Heat shimmered off the rails. Sheriff Boyd leaned against the telegraph post, squinting toward the passenger car. "Reckon that's her," someone muttered. The door opened with a groan. A porter appeared, lifting down a worn leather trunk, then a folded chair of polished oak and iron. The crowd shifted. Then she came, small, pale, her gloved hands tied on the armrests as she rolled herself into the sunlight. A wheelchair. Murmurs swept through the onlookers. "Lord help him, that can't be right. Caleb Strawn's mail-order bride?" She didn't flinch. Her eyes, gray as a storm horizon, swept the crowd once and moved on. She wore traveling lace yellowed by dust, a brimmed hat with a wilted blue ribbon. There was a quiet dignity in her, like someone too tired for shame. Bootsteps crunched behind the wagon line. Caleb Strawn stepped out from the edge of the crowd, broad, weathered, shoulders square beneath a sun-bleached duster. His face was unreadable, jaw hard as stone. The wind pressed his hat brim low, shadowing his eyes. He didn't offer pity, didn't smile, just stood before her. "Mrs. Grace." His voice came low, like gravel. She nodded once. "Mr. Strawn." The pause between them hung long enough for the wind to whistle through it. Then Caleb bent, lifted her trunk with one hand, and nodded toward his wagon. "This way." No small talk, no wedding band, just the sound of wooden wheels creaking over packed dust as he lifted her, gentle, careful, as though afraid she might break. The crowd parted silently. She caught a glimpse of faces, wide-eyed, curious, cruel. Children staring, women whispering behind parasols. The world blurred by heat and humiliation. Inside the wagon, she kept her eyes on her gloves, fingers trembling once before she stilled them. "You come far?" Caleb asked after a long while, reins loose in his hands. "Far enough." The road out of town twisted between dry creek beds and red cliffs that seemed to bleed color into the air. The sun pressed against the back of her neck like a brand. Caleb's horse snorted, uneasy. The land stretched wide and empty, dotted with dead mesquite and the ghosts of fence posts. The only sound was the steady creak of the wheels and the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Evelyn dared a glance at him. His face was carved deep by years, but not cruel. The lines at his eyes were not of laughter, but of loss. A widower, she'd been told. A man who'd buried his heart and gone on plowing the land. When he caught her looking, she turned away. They reached a ridge with a hole of red mesa spread below, cattle grazing in the golden light, a creek glinting like a thread of glass. Far off stood a weathered house and a barn that leaned against the wind. "That's home," he said. The word home hit her chest with strange weight. A hawk circled overhead. Dust trailed behind the wagon like smoke. "Your boy," she said after a while. "Jonah, isn't it?" Caleb nodded. "He's shy. His ma passed 3 winters back. Don't take kindly to strangers." "Neither do I," she murmured. He glanced at her again, as though trying to read what kind of woman would cross the country in a chair for a man she'd never met. But she gave him nothing. Her hands rested in her lap, still and composed. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched across the dirt road, long and thin as scars. When they reached the ranch, the dog barked first, a wiry cattle hound that darted around the wagon wheels, tail stiff with suspicion. A boy followed, barefoot, a slingshot in his hand. "Jonah," Caleb said, "come meet Mrs. Grace." The boy froze, eyes darting from his father to the woman in the wagon. He said nothing. She smiled faintly. "Hello, Jonah." He turned and ran for the porch. Caleb sighed. "Told you. Shy." Evelyn's smile didn't fade. "He's cautious. That's different." Caleb carried her chair from the wagon, set it down gently on the packed earth, then lifted her from the seat. She was lighter than he'd expected. Her breath caught as his arm brushed hers, unexpectedly warm. He wheeled her toward the porch. Boards creaked beneath them. "House ain't much," he said. "It's standing," she replied. "That's more than some places I've been." Inside smelled of cedar, smoke, and years of quiet. The table was set for two, though a third plate sat empty, dusty. A woman's shawl hung still by the door, untouched. Evelyn's eyes lingered there, but she said nothing. Caleb poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. You can rest in the front room. Bed's firm. Floor's clean. Thank you. He hesitated, hat in hand. I don't mean to pry, ma'am, but you'll need help getting around the ranch. There's hills. Uneven ground. I've managed worse. He nodded once, jaw tightening. Suppose you have. The silence between them grew thick, like unspoken history. Outside, cicadas droned. The dog barked once and fell quiet. She wheeled to the window, watching the sunset melt into red across the canyon. This land, she whispered. It looks wounded. Caleb stood behind her, eyes on the same horizon. It is. Neither spoke again for a long time. When darkness settled, he lit the lamp and went to close the door. Evelyn caught the reflection of his hands in the glass, scarred, steady, not a farmer's hands alone. Good night, Mr. Strawn. He paused, turned. Good night, Mrs. Grace. She waited until his footsteps faded down the hall, then opened her small traveling trunk. Inside lay a folded letter, edges worn soft. Beneath it, hidden in the lining, a torn scrap of parchment, the edge of a wanted poster. The name printed there was half gone, smudged by time, but still legible enough to read the last word. Strawn. The night wind pushed through the open window, carrying the sound of the desert. Lonely, endless, like something waiting to be finished. And from somewhere far off, a coyote howled. The old storyteller's voice came low and distant, like a memory half remembered. And so she came to Red Mesa, rolling on iron wheels, carrying secrets that could scorch the earth and a heart that might yet heal it. The ranch at Red Mesa. The wind slammed the barn door open with a crack. Evelyn flinched, fingers tightening around the sewing needle in her lap. The sound rolled through the quiet ranch like thunder. Jonah, Caleb's voice carried from the corral. Latch that door before it takes flight. The boy ran past the porch, barefoot, dust streaked on his face. He yanked the latch down, fighting against the wind. Evelyn watched from the open window, the storm's breath tugging at the lace curtain beside her. Beyond the porch, the land stretched wide and restless. The late sun burned through layers of red dust, painting the sky the color of blood, oranges, and smoke. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old pine. Evelyn's wheelchair sat between the window and the hearth, where the fire spat and cracked, throwing gold across the floorboards. The silence returned, dense, watchful. Caleb came in, shaking dust from his hat, his shirt clinging with sweat. He poured himself a drink, the water dripping from the brim of his glass. Fence posts along the west ridge are down again, he muttered. Cattle keep wandering. Evelyn looked up from her stitching. You could use help. He glanced her way, half a smile tugging at his mouth. Didn't figure you'd volunteer for fence duty. Her tone was dry. I meant hiring a hand, not offering my legs. He nodded, the faintest flicker of humor softening his eyes. Hands re scarce. Good ones, anyway. The storm deepened, clouds bruising the horizon. Rain smelled close, but never came. Evelyn set her sewing aside and wheeled toward the kitchen table. You've got too much land for one man and a boy. Boy's growing, Caleb said. Not fast enough. Her words hung in the air. For a moment, only the ticking of the wall clock filled the space between them. Caleb leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You always speak so plain? Habit from a war. His gaze sharpened. War. She didn't answer at first. The fire snapped. I nursed soldiers back east. The dying ones stopped pretending, so you learn to do the same. He nodded slowly, like the truth of it hurt to hear. That why you came here? Evelyn's hands rested still on the arms of her chair. I came because I was tired of ghosts. A low rumble sounded outside. Hoofbeats, distant but steady. Caleb straightened. You hear that? Evelyn wheeled closer to the window. Through the gathering dark, two riders passed the ridge, shadows moving like smoke against the fading light. Neighbors? She asked. Not mine. Caleb set down his glass, jaw tightening. Not anyone's that I care to meet. He crossed the room, opened the cabinet beside the door, and pulled out a Winchester rifle. The metal gleamed dull and familiar in his hands. Evelyn saw how easily he handled it. You keep that for coyotes? she asked quietly. He didn't answer. The riders disappeared into the dusk. After a moment, he lowered the rifle, though his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. They won't come close tonight, he said finally. Too much wind. Evelyn turned from the window. You didn't flinch when you saw them. Caleb looked down at her. I've seen worse. The firelight caught the scar that ran from his wrist to the inside of his forearm, thin, silver old. Later, after supper, Jonah sat near the hearth carving shapes into a piece of driftwood. Evelyn read aloud from a worn book, her voice soft, lilting in rhythm with the rain beginning to whisper against the roof. Caleb sat silent, listening, not to the story, but to the sound of her words filling spaces he hadn't realized were empty. When Jonah's eyelids drooped, Evelyn closed the book and nodded toward the boy. He's falling asleep on his feet. Caleb lifted his son, carried him gently down the hall. The boy's head rested against his shoulder, the movement practiced tender. Evelyn watched until they disappeared. She wheeled to the window again. The rain had thinned, but in the distance lightning flashed beyond the mesa. White, jagged, silent. In its glow, something glinted near the barn. A figure on horseback, motionless, watching. Her breath caught. The shadow turned its horse and vanished into the storm. Caleb returned moments later, saw her face, and followed her gaze. Nothing there now, just darkness and rain. What did you see? He asked. Someone watching. His hand brushed the window frame, fingers tapping once, twice. You sure? Yes. He looked out again, long and hard. You best get some rest. Storm's likely to pass before dawn. But his eyes said something else. He believed her. That night, sleep came uneasy. The wind scraped against the shutters, carrying the smell of wet earth and something metallic. Gun oil, faint but familiar. Evelyn woke to footsteps outside her door. Heavy, slow. She held her breath. Then Caleb's voice came low through the wood. Mrs. Grace. Yes. There's something you should know. She opened the door. The lamplight from the hall carved shadows across his face. He held a piece of paper in his hand, worn and folded. He hesitated before passing it to her. She unfolded it slowly. It was a wanted poster, edges burnt, words barely legible under years of grime. But the face was unmistakable. Caleb Strawn, younger, eyes sharper, jaw set harder. The bounty was large. Evelyn's heart pounded once, heavy and cold. How long have you known? He exhaled. Long enough to know they'll come for me again. Those riders today, they weren't strangers. Old ghosts. She studied him in the lamp's glow. You were a gunfighter. He looked away. I was a fool. Thought I could trade bullets for peace. Found neither. The silence stretched. The rain drummed harder now, as though urging confession from the walls. Evelyn folded the poster carefully, set it on the table. They'll come again. They will. And you'll fight. He met her eyes. If I have to. She nodded slowly. Then we should be ready. Caleb blinked, surprised. We? Evelyn's mouth curved, not quite a smile. I didn't come here to die running. I came here to stop running. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. He studied her face a long time, then gave a single nod. Sun will rise soon. We'll need to see the tracks come daylight. As he turned to leave, Evelyn spoke softly. Mr. Strawn, those men, why now? Caleb's hand paused on the doorframe. Because I used to ride with them, and I'm the only one who ever left alive. The door closed behind him, leaving her in the thin light of the lamp. Evelyn wheeled to the window again. Rain had stopped. Dawn began to blush at the edge of the world. She reached into her shawl and touched the small silver cross she kept hidden there, a relic from the war, from a man she'd once tried to save and couldn't. Outside, somewhere in the wet earth beyond the fence, hoofprints waited in the mud like promises. And though her hands trembled, her eyes were steady. The old storyteller's voice rose with the wind. So they lived on the edge of silence and storm. Those two souls of Red Mesa. One haunted by the blood he spilled, the other by the blood she couldn't save. The wind knew their names. And soon, so would death. The truth buried beneath the dust. Thunder cracked, so close it rattled the windows. The lamp flame jumped, shadows leaping across the walls. Evelyn steadied it with one hand, the other pressed against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat pound like hooves. Outside, dogs barked. Then came the sound, faint at first, then swelling, the rhythmic thud of horses in the dark. Caleb kicked open the door, rifle already in hand. They're here. Rain poured in sheets, slicing the yard of mud. Through the gray curtain of water, figures appeared on horseback. 5, maybe 6, torches flickering against their slickers. The Reeves gang. Evelyn rolled forward, eyes fixed on the light burning closer. Jonah? In the cellar, Caleb said, voice hard, barely human. He stays there till I say. She saw his hands, steady, practiced, death already memorized in every motion. He loaded shells by touch, each metallic click swallowed by thunder. Lightning split the sky, bright enough to show the faces of the men at the gate. One, tall with a scar like a hook from jaw to ear, sat high in the saddle. Silas Hodge. His voice carried through the storm. Caleb Strawn, you thought you could bury what you stole, but the dust, don't forget. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, the light from the doorway carving him against the black. Ain't nothing left to take here, Silas. Oh, there's something, Silas called. Reckon your boy's old enough now. Might pay back a debt in blood. The words hit the air like poison. Evelyn's hand found the pistol Caleb had set by the door. Cold steel. Heavy. Familiar. Stay inside, Caleb said without turning. She wheeled forward anyway. You'll need more than bullets. He glanced back once, rain running from his hat brim, eyes dark with everything unspoken. Then he stepped into the storm. The first shot cracked before lightning faded. Wood splintered beside the doorway. Evelyn ducked, the lamp toppling. Glass shattered, the fire went out. Only the storm's flash lit the chaos now. She pushed herself toward the wall, dragging the chair over the uneven floorboards. Every muscle in her arms burned. Through the window, she saw Caleb moving between flashes. One man against many, fast as memory. He fired, reloaded, fired again. 2 horses screamed, throwing their riders. But the gang fanned wide, circling. One peeled toward the house. Evelyn aimed through the glass, breath steady, eyes narrowed. The rider's silhouette surged closer, and she fired. The recoil jarred her shoulder. The man fell, his torch rolling into the mud, flames hissing out. Another shape loomed in the doorway. She turned the pistol, but the man was faster. He kicked the chair, sending her sprawling. The gun skidded across the floor. His boot pinned her skirt as he bent close, breath sour with whiskey. The cripple's got teeth, he sneered. She drove the sewing needle still clutched in her hand straight into his neck. He screamed, staggered back. She dragged herself toward the fallen pistol, arms trembling, legs dead weight. Outside, Caleb shouted her name. Another gun roared. His, then 2 more not his. Evelyn. She gripped the pistol, turned, fired once. The intruder dropped where he stood, smoke curling in the lamplight. Rain pounded the roof. The storm's fury filled every corner. She forced herself upright, leaning against the wall. Then silence. Only the storm breathing. She crawled toward the open door, dragging one useless leg. Caleb stumbled inside, blood darkening his shoulder. He fell to one knee beside her. You're hit. He shook his head. It's not bad. But the crimson spreading through his shirt said otherwise. Outside, a shadow moved, a single rider dismounting, slow, deliberate. Silas. He stepped into the doorway, rifle leveled. You always were too noble, Caleb. Could have ruled the frontier if you'd stayed one of us. Caleb raised his gun, but his arm shook. Don't, Silas said. You'll die slow. Let the woman watch. Evelyn pushed herself up on shaking arms. Mud streaked her dress, blood at her temple. Her voice was steady. You don't touch him. Silas sneered. And who's going to stop me? You. Her hands gripped the wall, pulling herself upright inch by inch. Her legs trembled under her. For a heartbeat, she thought they'd give out. Then, something inside her broke, or mended, it didn't matter which. She stood. Caleb's eyes widened, disbelieving. Silas froze, confusion flashing across his face. You're supposed to be. Her first step was slow, but her balance held. Not anymore. She leveled the pistol, both hands steady. Rain dripped from her hair, down her jaw. Silas smirked. You won't fire. You ain't got it in you. Evelyn's eyes met his. I've seen worse than you. I cleaned the blood of better men. He cocked the rifle. Then you know how this ends. The shot echoed through the storm. Silas fell before his finger reached the trigger, eyes wide, mouth slack. The pistol smoked in her hands. Caleb caught her as her knees gave out. She sagged against him, breath coming fast, raw. You stood, he whispered. I remembered how, she said. When it mattered. Rain softened to drizzle. The thunder rolled away toward the mesas. Outside, the gang lay scattered like ghosts that never learned when to quit. Caleb pressed his hand to his wound, blood seeping between his fingers. Jonah, he's safe, she said. You saved him. He looked at her then, really looked. So did you. For a long time, neither moved. The air smelled of smoke and wet dust and gunpowder, the scent of survival. Lightning flashed one last time across the mesa, revealing the bodies, the fallen torches, the broken fence. The storm had washed everything clean but the truth. Caleb's head fell back against the wall. Guess I can't hide anymore. Evelyn brushed rain for his brow. Then don't. The world already knows what kind of man you are. He smiled faintly. And what kind are you, Mrs. Grace? She looked down at the pistol in her hand. The kind who's done running. Wind moved through the open door, carrying the smell of rain and sage, the first cool breath after too many dry years. The old storyteller's voice rose, soft as the dying storm. When the thunder rolled over Red Mesa that night, it carried more than rain. It carried the names of two souls who met their reckoning and found redemption in the dust. One had laid down his gun. The other had learned to stand. Outside, dawn began to bleed through the clouds, faint, silver alive. The echo of the last shot. The night split open with a single gunshot. For a breathless instant, everything in the barn froze. The horses snorted, the storm wind caught its breath, and even the thunder dared not speak. Then the echo rolled down the valley like judgment. Jonah staggered back, his hand clutching his side. The lamplight caught the blood blooming dark through his shirt. Across from him, in the center of the barn, sat Clara, wheelchair still locked, gun barrel trembling in her grasp, smoke curling from the muzzle like the spirit of the past refusing to die. Don't take another step, she said, her voice shaking but steadying itself in the same breath. Not unless you're ready to meet God. The outlaw beside Jonas, Redden, the lean one with the scar, snarled and raised his revolver. Clara didn't flinch. Another crack. He fell backward into the hay, dead before his hat hit the floor. Jonas blinked, confusion clouding the pain. You can stand? Clara's eyes met his. In the wavering light, they held both fury and something that looked a lot like sorrow. I never said I couldn't. And then, before his stunned gaze, she rose, slowly, painfully, as if the motion itself were an act of war. The crutches she'd hidden behind the feed barrel came into view. She used them, steady as a gunslinger sighting his target. I came here crippled, she said through clenched teeth, because men like you only see what's broken. Jonas spat blood, trying to steady his aim. You lied. You killed my husband, she said, voice trembling, and you think you deserve truth? The wind slammed the barn door wide, scattering hay and lightning shadows through the space. In that flash, the storm outside seemed to answer her rage. Jonas dropped his pistol to the dirt, eyes wide. Clara Mayfield. You're the widow of a sheriff you gunned down at Silver Creek, she finished for him. And the one you mocked when they rolled me into the courtroom. Said I was too broken to avenge him. Another thunderclap shook the roof. He lunged. The gun roared again, once, twice. Jonas fell face first into the mud, his body twitching as lightning flared white across the valley. When the sound faded, all that was left was the pounding rain. Clara lowered her pistol, the smell of smoke and blood mixing with wet hay. She slumped against a post, trembling as her crutches clattered to the floor. Outside, hooves pounded closer, Marshal Hale and his riders, drawn by the shots. The barn door burst open, rifles raised. They froze at the sight. Jonas and his men sprawled across the dirt. Clara in her chair again, head bowed, gun empty in her lap. Hale's voice cracked. Good Lord Almighty. Clara didn't look up. Took you long enough. The marshal stepped closer, hand gentle on her shoulder. You shouldn't have had to do this alone. She gave a small, broken laugh. Wasn't alone. My husband taught me every shot I fired tonight. The wind sighed through the barn slats, carrying the faintest echo of a man's voice, like the whisper of a promise kept. Hale swallowed hard. You know, folks will tell this story for years. Clara looked out through the open doors. The storm was breaking now, dawn seeping over the canyons like light, finding its way into an old scar. Then tell it right, she said softly. Tell them a mail-order bride came in a wheelchair and left on her own 2 feet. By midday, the valley had gone still again. The graves were dug on the ridge, marked only with stones and silence. Clara sat in her chair, watching the dust settle across the plains. Hale approached, holding out a folded piece of paper. Territory's offering you a pardon for what had to be done. She took it without reading. No law needed pardoning tonight, Marshal. Just judgment. He nodded, then looked toward the horizon. What do you do now? Clara smiled faintly, her eyes far away. Finish what he started. There's land here, still worth saving. Maybe build a school. A place where the broken learn to stand again. A pause. You ever think you'll marry again? Hale asked, almost gently. Clara looked down at her hands. The same hands that had trembled, then steadied, then ended the evil that took everything from her. Maybe someday, she said, but not until I've earned peace enough to share it. The marshal tipped his hat and walked away, his boots whispering over the dust. For a long while, she sat there alone, watching the wind play across the grass. Then she reached for the crutches beside her, planted them firm, and rose once more, each step a vow written in the dirt. The sky stretched wide and clean above her, the storm finally gone. And if you ask the old men at the saloon today, those who still remember when Justice wore a skirt and held a smoking gun, they'll tell you that night was the last time anyone saw Clara Mayfield. Some say she rode west toward the mountains, starting a new life under another name. Others swear she still haunts that ridge, where the lightning first lit her fury. But every so often, when thunder rolls over Silver Creek, you can almost hear the echo of her last words, soft as prayer, sharp as legend. Tell them I came in a wheelchair and left walking.